Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 2 to 6 player game, Monopoly, designed by Elizabeth J. Maggie and Charles Darrow, and published by Hasbro. Having now taught over 300 different board games here on this channel, it's time to teach an old classic from 1933, Monopoly. Now, sometimes this game's rules are treated more like suggestions by its players, but not here. Here, we're going to learn how it's actually played. So join me at the table and let's get started. To set up, place the board in the center of the play area. Then shuffle and place the chance cards, which have this back, and the community chess cards with this back, into face-down decks on their designated spots. Nearby, create an area for the bank, which will contain the game's money along with the title deed cards, greenhouses, and red hotel pieces. One player at the table is chosen to be the banker. They're still a regular player, but they also have the added responsibility of managing the bank's money, the deeds, hotels, and houses. And their first duty is to give each player $1,500 from the bank, including themselves, but they'll have to make sure during the game they never mix up their personal money with the bank's money. Everyone also picks one of the tokens to represent themselves, placing it on the go space of the board. The other tokens can then be returned to the box. Each player now takes a turn rolling the included dice, totaling the result, and the player who gets the highest amount, re-rolling any ties, will be the starting player. And that's the setup. In Monopoly, players will be spending money to acquire properties and then charge the other players rent for landing on them. If you're the last player with money after everyone else has run out, you win. The game is played over a series of turns, starting with the first player and then going clockwise around and around the table. And on your turn, you'll roll both of the dice. You total the result and then move that number of spaces clockwise around the board. You then take certain actions based on the space that you ended up on, and we'll go through those options in just a moment. But after moving and resolving your space, the next player in clockwise order goes, rolling the dice and moving their piece. And if two pieces ever end up on the same spot, that's perfectly fine. If you ever roll doubles, then after moving and resolving the space you landed on, then you roll again. Move and resolve the new space. And you'll do this each time that you roll doubles. But if you roll doubles 3 times in a row, instead of moving, you are sent directly to jail, which is this area of the space here. We'll talk more about jail a little bit later. The board is made up of several types of spaces, but most are known as properties, and there are 3 different types of properties. Streets are one type, which come in sets with matching colored bars above them. For example, these 3 streets are one set. These 3 streets over here are another set. There are also 4 railroad properties, as well as 2 utilities, the waterworks and the electric company. Each of these types of properties has one title deed card that you'll find in the bank with a matching name. Whenever your piece lands on a property space, like we have here, if the matching title deed is still in the bank, then you have the option to buy it at the cost shown here. This is the symbol for Monopoly money. So just give that amount to the banker, who then puts it in the bank and gives you the title deed for that space. The banker will also give you any change you are owed if you overpaid. And keep in mind, the bank can never run out of money. If you do run out of paper money in the bank, just have the banker record how much you are owed on a piece of paper. Or use a suitable replacement. Once you have paid for a property, place it face up in front of yourself so everyone else can easily see what you own. If a player decides not to buy a property that they landed on, the banker still removes it from the bank and then sells it at an auction. Any player, including the person who initially passed on the property, can shout out a price they're willing to pay, starting at $10 and then increasing by as little as $1 after that. Players will keep trying to outbid each other, calling out higher prices until only one person remains. The property is then sold to that player who had the highest bid. Now, what this means is that whether the current player buys the property or not, it is likely that someone will have bought it before the turn is over. That said, if no one offers a bid on the property at all, it will just go back to the bank. Another possibility is that a player will land on a property already owned by another player. Let's say the car player owned this property and then the dog landed on it. When you land on a space where someone else already has the deed for it, you must pay them rent. Well, sort of. It is the property owner's responsibility to collect the rent. If a player lands on a space that I own, but I forget to demand rent from them, then once the next player in turn order has rolled the dice, it's too late for me to ask for payment. So keep an eye out for where people are landing. But with that understood, let's go back to the table and see how much rent you can charge. The normal amount is listed here on the title deed. So in this case, the dog player would pay $10 to the car player. However, if a player owns all of the properties of a colored set, they charge double the rent, which is listed here. So in this case, $20. As we'll see, houses or a hotel might be located on a property. If so, rent is based on these prices. So if the car player had 3 houses on this property, then the dog player would have to pay them $450. You can only build houses on streets if you own the title deeds for all the properties of that set. Once that's the case, at any time, even if it's not your turn, you can buy buildings for those properties. Just note though, you cannot buy buildings for a street set if any one of those properties are mortgaged. That means flipped over like this. But we'll talk about how properties get mortgaged a little bit later. I just mentioned that you can buy buildings at any time during the game, but there's actually one restriction. You cannot do anything after a player has rolled the dice and before they've resolved the space that they landed on. Only before the dice are rolled or after they resolve their space can you engage in these anytime activities like buying houses. The cost to buy a house is printed on your deed for that property. So for example, if the car player wanted to put a house on this property, it would cost them $100. They take the house from the supply and then put it up here in the colored bar. The catch is that properties within a colored set must always improve at the same rate. In other words, if I had bought a house for this one, I can't buy another for it until I make sure that each one of these also has a house. Then I could add a second one here. But just know, I didn't have to add a second one to this property. Once they're all even, I could have added this to any of the properties, maybe even going over here instead. If I want to add a third house to a property, I would first have to have 2 on each of these, then I could add a third house, and so on. You can buy as many houses at a time as you like, as long as you can afford it. Just ensure you're distributing them among the matching properties evenly. Every street property can have, at most, 4 houses each, and after that, you may upgrade the 4 houses to a hotel at the cost showing here on its deed. Just return the houses there back to the bank's supply and put a hotel in their place. At most, only 1 hotel can be on each street property. So when all of these properties in the purple color set have been upgraded, it would look exactly like this. It is possible for the bank to run out of houses or hotels. And if this happens, players cannot build new ones until the bank gets some back, and we'll see how that can happen a little bit later. Since you can add buildings to your properties at any time, if more than one person wants to buy the very last type of a particular building from the bank, it is instead auctioned starting at $10 and then sold to the highest bidder. Instead of landing on a street property, you may land on one of the board's 4 railroads. These are purchased in the same way, paying the cost here, but the rent you charge to other players who land on them is based on how many other railroads you own. For example, if I owned 2 railroads and a player landed on this one, they would have to pay me $50 in rent. Whereas if I owned all 4 railroads, they would have to pay me $200. There are also 2 utility locations like this one, which are bought and auctioned in the usual way. And when another player lands on one of these after it has been purchased, they pay rent to the owner by following the instructions here printed on the deed. The next spaces I'm going to show you, like this luxury tax space, cannot be purchased or owned by any player, but instead something happens when you land there. In this case, you have to pay $100 to the bank, while landing on the income tax space will require you to pay $200 to the bank. You will also find community chest and chance spaces around the board. When you end on either of their spaces, reveal the top card from the related deck, follow its instructions, and then return it face down to the bottom of its deck. The exception is the get out of jail free card. The player who draws it will keep it until they wish to use it, or they can sell it at any time to any other player if those players can agree on a price. Here we have the free parking space. Landing here does nothing. You don't collect any money or gain any properties. On the other hand, this is the go space, and it does plenty. If your token lands on or passes this space, the banker pays you $200 from the bank. Now, something I should point out is that when you're resolving a community chest or a chance card, it might instruct you to go to a certain location on the board. For example, if I had just landed on this chance space and drew this card, it tells me to advance to Illinois Avenue. Well, this is actually just back here. However, when you advance or move in this game, you always go in clockwise order. So that means I have to go in this direction, passing go to get here. And because I passed go, that means I collect $200. Next up, we have the jail space, and it's broken into two separate areas. This just visiting area and the jail itself. If you end up here after rolling the dice or on any kind of regular move, just put your token on the just visiting area. There's no penalty for this, and you'll keep moving as normal on your next turn. However, if you draw a card that causes you to go to jail, like this one, or you land on the go to jail space, or if you roll doubles 3 times in a row, then you must move your piece to the jail area, and you do not get $200 if you happen to pass go on the way. When in jail, at the start of your next turn, you have an option. Either spend $50 back to the bank, or use a get out of jail free card. In either of those cases, you then get to leave jail. You'll roll the dice and then move and resolve the space as normal. Or instead of paying money or using a card, you can risk it and just roll the dice. If you get doubles, then you also get to leave jail, moving the amount rolled and resolving your turn as normal. But if you don't get doubles, you're stuck in jail for that turn and you don't get to do anything else. At the start of your next turn, you'll again get the same option. Either pay your way out or risk rolling the dice. On your third turn in a row, if you're still in jail, and rather than pay your way out, choose to roll the dice, if you don't get doubles, then you must pay $50, and then you leave jail and move the distance showing on the dice you rolled and resolve your new location. Anytime you're in jail, you are still allowed to collect rent and buy and sell properties or buildings. Speaking of which, we need to discuss selling. Sometimes you're going to be running low on money and you need more, and you can sell things you have at any time, even during another player's turn. Houses and hotels cannot be sold to other players, but a railroad, utility, or a street property without a house or hotel on it may be sold to any player for whatever amount of money you can get. They give you the agreed upon amount, and then you give them the deed. Buildings you have on your properties can be sold back to the bank for half the price that you paid for them. So each of these, for example, would give you $50. And you can sell several at once, but just remove them one at a time in an even manner, just like you did when constructing them. For example, if I wanted to sell a house from one of these properties, the first one would have to come from here. Now there's an even number of houses, so I could sell any one of these, perhaps this one. The next one could come from either this property or this one. The next would have to come from here, and so on. You can also sell a hotel on a property. This also gives you half of its original value, so $50 in this case, and then you convert it back into 4 houses. Now remember, I said that house and hotel pieces are limited, and that means you cannot sell a hotel if there are not 4 houses to take from the supply to put in its place, unless you're willing to sell as many hotels and houses as necessary until you can place a valid number of houses from those that remain in the supply onto your properties. For example, this is a valid arrangement of houses, and it would mean I've now sold 2 hotels and 3 houses from each of these 2 properties, and a total of 1 hotel and 4 houses from this one. And remember, each of those sales will only count for half their original value. Another way to get money is to mortgage a property that you own that doesn't have any buildings on it. To do this, you flip your title deed over and then you collect the value showing here from the bank. While a property is mortgaged, you cannot collect rent from other players who land on it, though you will still get rent from other properties that you own within its color group. And if you own all the properties of that color, but 1 or 2 are mortgaged, you still collect the double rent if a player lands on a property within that set that isn't mortgaged. And the same is true when you have a mix of unmortgaged and mortgaged railroads or utilities. If you want to remove a mortgage on a property that you own, pay this amount, which is the mortgage plus 10%, back to the bank, and then flip the card over. In addition to properties, you can also sell get-out-of-jail cards to other players. Now, aside from houses and hotels, you can really make any kinds of deals and trades for cards, properties, or money with players at any time. Even a mortgaged property can be sold or traded, but a player who takes on a mortgaged property from another player has a choice they must immediately make. They either pay the mortgage off right away, giving the bank this amount of money, and then they get to flip the deed over, or they can leave it mortgaged, and they just have to pay the bank 10%, which is the difference between these two numbers. So $7 in this case. Then, if they want to unmortgage the property later, they'll still have to pay this full amount of $77. As you can see, there are a few different ways to get money when you're running low, but players can never give loans to each other. If you would ever need to pay money to another player and you don't have any way to raise the cash that you owe, then you go bankrupt. First, you'll sell all of your buildings at half price back to the bank, giving that money to the player you owed. You'll also turn over everything else that you have to them. If this includes mortgaged properties, they either pay the mortgage off or just 10%, as we just discussed. If you instead owe the bank money and can't pay, you must return all houses and hotels that you have back to the bank, and any mortgaged properties that you have are then unmortgaged. The bank then immediately auctions all of your properties one at a time to the other players. Assuming that you aren't bankrupt, after your turn is over, you pass the dice to the player on your left, and then they go. However, if you do go bankrupt during a turn, you're out of the game, and when everyone but a single player has gone bankrupt, the game is over and the surviving player wins. Now, there is one thing I should mention. Normally, I try to answer all the questions people ask in the comments of my videos, but there are some that may come up when playing Monopoly that the rulebook just doesn't address, and I don't have a contact at Hasbro I can check with. So in those cases, I'll do the best research I can, and if I find answers, I'll put them in the description of this video. But otherwise, that's how you play Monopoly. If you have any questions, do feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to find an answer for you as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. But until next time, thanks for watching.